Welcome back to Twisted Tales of Murder. Many people, myself included, can tell you facts about crazy killers, but why not hear from them instead? This is part one of From the Mouths of Murderers. All of these interviews took place not long before their death. Much of this content is sensitive and gruesome. Please be advised. Before we dive in to our first murderer's interview, remember to like and subscribe. Ted Bundy was a serial killer, rapist, and necrophiliac who is known to have murdered at least 20 women during the 1970s, and he admitted to killing 36. However, many experts believe his actual victim count might be over 100. He was arrested for good in February of 1978 and received 3 separate death sentences for the murders of 2 Chi Omega sorority members at Florida State University and a 12-year-old girl. Bundy's alleged charming appearance helped him become somewhat of a celebrity during his trial, and his case has since inspired many novels and films about serial killers. Before his execution, he tried to offer information about unknown victims to have a stay on his execution. These are some of his final words before his execution on January 24th, 1989.
The evening before his execution in 1989, serial killer Ted Bundy sat down for an exclusive interview with Dr. James Dobson. Bundy took responsibility for his actions, but he blamed pornography as a key factor in the killings of at least 35 women and girls.
I've lived in prison for a long time now, and I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography without question, without exception.
Bundy requested the interview with Dr. Dobson because he had watched him serve on the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography. He trusted the Focus on the Family founder to convey his warnings accurately.
And what scares and appalls me, Dr. Dobson, is when I see what's on cable TV. Some of the movies, some of the violence in the movies that come into homes today was stuff that they wouldn't show in X-rated adult theaters 30 years ago. This stuff,
The slasher movies that you're talking about.
that stuff is, I'm telling you from personal experience, the most that is graphic violence on screen, particularly as it gets into the home to children who may be unattended or unaware that they may be a Ted Bundy who has that vulnerability to that predisposition to be influenced by that kind of behavior, by that kind of movie, that kind.
Our second serial killer is Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker. He was an American serial killer who murdered at least 14 people and was convicted of attempting murder 5 others. After developing epilepsy as a child, he became a very heavy drug user. He also cultivated an interest in Satanism, which became his calling card. He committed at least 30 violent crimes that included rape, torture, and most of these happened in the spring and summer of 1985. He was apprehended in August of 1985 and was sentenced to death at the conclusion of his trial. He spent the remainder of his days at California's San Quentin prison. He did not like to talk about his crimes, but here is his account prior to dying in June of 2013 at the age of 53.
The Night Stalker killed at least 13 times, 13 people who were awakened in the night to face death. At least 15 others survived his brutal attacks.
I didn't particularly care for people.
In a rare interview, Ramirez refused to discuss his own crimes, but had this to say about serial killers.
A serial killer comes about by circumstances and like a recipe, poverty, drugs, child abuse. These things, contribute to a person, to a person's frustration and anger. And at some point in life, he explodes.
Perhaps for Richard Ramirez, that anger and frustration turned to rage, which he in turn took out on his victims. His killings were so sadistic and brutal that even experienced detectives were shocked.
Well, he took a woman in her 60s and stomped her to death with his foot, leaving an imprint of a shoe on the side of her face. From that to just executing somebody upon walking into a room after he entered a house. He strangled, he used a ligature, he used a tire iron on a young girl, beat her, left her for dead.
When your anger subsided, you had to wipe up your mother's blood. I couldn't face it. I had to do my
Why on earth would you have hurt those people? Why did you kill those people?
No comments. No comments. I cannot answer it at this time.
What was Richard's motive?
Kill,
That's it?
to kill. Simple as that.
Richard Ramirez was raised in El Paso, Texas, the youngest of 5 children born to hardworking, strict parents. Eddie Milam was Richard's best friend back then and remembers when he began to change into a troublemaker.
I did start seeing something going wrong with Ricky Ramirez. I think what really messed him up was the acid. He would do a lot of acid. The stealing, I noticed the stealing and then started as a peeping Tom and things like that.
Ramirez's passion for burglary earned him the nicknames of Ricky the Thief and Fingers, but Eddie knew Ramirez had other serious problems when he was fired from a local hotel.
He said he was fired, he was dismissed due to the cause that he had tried to molest some 2 little kids that were going up the elevator.
By 18, Ramirez was a high school dropout, drifting around California. He stayed in Skid Row hotels, never seemed to work, but always had the money to buy cocaine. Friends say the Richard Ramirez they knew didn't date and wasn't the type to commit such heinous crimes. But convicted murderer Martin Kipp, who befriended Ramirez in prison, says he heard another side of the night.
Richard told me he needed to associate gruesome violence with sex in order to be completely satisfied. He also told me that he had to violently fantasize about his victims before he could go away sexually gratified.
They are desires, where if I didn't give in to them, I would be crushed by them. I believe in the evil in human nature. This is a wicked world. And in a wicked world, wicked people are born. I'm not going to blame society, my race, people, or anything. It is up to the individual like myself to keep on knocking on whatever door they want to get into.
Because the victims and the methods of killing were so diverse, many experts felt there was no one Night Stalker. Detectives Carrillo and Salerno disagreed and finally broke the case by matching shoe prints. The subsequent trial turned into one of America's most notorious courtroom dramas, punctuated by continual outbursts from Ramirez. In that trial, Ramirez's fascination with Satanism emerged.
As far as Satan is concerned, I believe in a malevolent being. His description eludes me, but I have felt powers that are evil.
After an 8-month trial, Ramirez was convicted of all 13 murders and given multiple death sentences.
I don't care about myself, really. No, I don't care about what happens to me. I never did, really.
Richard Ramirez was not the only serial killer you will see today that had a fascination with Satan. Charles Manson, a man that spearheaded a murderous campaign with his followers, the Manson family cult, who helped to make him one of the most infamous criminals in history. The group's killing spree included the notorious brutal slaying of pregnant actress Sharon Tate and other Hollywood residents. For these crimes, Manson received the death penalty in 1971, a sentence that was commuted to life in prison the following year. In total, it is thought that he is responsible for 35 murders. Manson died in prison of natural causes in 2017, just after his 83rd birthday. But listen to the words of Charles Manson and try to convince me that he is sane.
While Manson was the evil madman behind the plan, it was his ragtag bunch of followers, Watson and 4 young women, including Susan Atkins, who actually committed the crimes.
Susan Atkins come home to you bloody-handed.
Yeah,
Says, Charlie, look what I did for you.
yeah. I give you the world. I just killed myself and I give you the world.
So, how'd you react?
I say, you dumb. I already had the world. You just put me back in jail again. That's what she did. She put me right back in jail.
Manson and his followers were tried, convicted, and sentenced to death or life imprisonment without parole. Then in 1972, 3 years after the crimes, the Supreme Court outlawed the death penalty. Now, incredibly, all in the Manson family are eligible for parole. At one of his own parole hearings, Manson spoke about his family of killers.
I don't want out of your prison unless I can go with my brothers and sisters. If I have a world and not my family, I have nothing.
Manson's disciples, mostly middle-class, college-age kids, were indeed the only family he could claim. Most of his life had been spent behind bars.
I didn't have no parents. When you don't have any parents, you got nobody, there's no place else to take you off the street and throw you somewhere.
Shuttled from foster family to one institution or another, Manson even landed in Boys Town in Omaha, Nebraska. It was for him a brief stay. The bright-eyed 14-year-old was thrown out after just 3 days. It was a disciplinary problem.
I've been in jail since 1943.
What year were you born?
34.
9 years old?
Yeah.
What was the first bus?
The first place?
The first bus.
My mother got out of jail. My mother got out of the joint and put me in with the monks, in with the Catholic monks, the brother monks there in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Yeah? They treat you bad?
No, they treated me like they treated all the other kids. But I seen them as a bunch of old women. So I ran off from there. I escaped out of the hood. Got out of that hood and went to Chicago.
Like you weren't raised up at all?
Please. No, I wasn't. I raised
You were
myself
like a
up.
wolf boy.
That's right. I raised myself up. Sure. Sure. I got a different way of doing everything. I got my own way, you know. Does that make me bad?
Makes you violent and bad, yeah.
I'm only as violent as I have to be. If I don't have to be violent, I'm not. But I was raised up where if you didn't fight, you got... If you didn't fight, you got taken away and your stuff was taken away. And I got 40 years of fighting in here. I can't read and write, but I can fight. They crowd me and I got this little space. My life is bigger than this little space. I live in the desert. I live in the mountains, man. I'm big. My mind is big. But everybody's kind of crowding me down and pushing me down and make me into all these little things that they need me to be. And that's not me at all, man. That's not me. I killed nobody. I broke no law. What you can't understand, Mr. G, is that I have been raised up in a different world than you've been raised up. I've been raised up in the penitentiary. There's no weakness in the penitentiary. There's no sorrow or remorse in the penitentiary. You come to the cell and you go in and you find Jesus or you don't. You either find Jesus or you run with the devil.
Don't you think Jesus would be appalled that you were invoking his name?
I didn't invoke any name. They put that on me. The spirit laid that over on my track. I'm the man in the mirror, guy.
I know, man.
You know, if you like me, I like you. If you don't like me, I don't like you. You swing at me, I'll swing back. You dig? You cut at me, I'll cut you. You know, whatever you point to me, I'll get back to you.
But it's more than that, though, isn't it, Charlie?
Well, sure, I'm in harmony with God. That's just a word. We don't, you know, we use the word God.
Or the devil.
Oh, the devil. Yeah, you could use the word devil or demons or whatever you want to call it.
Mostly the devil in your world, eh, Charlie?
Okay, I'll play. There's no game I can't play.
The people that say
I haven't played.
You are the devil here.
Okay, I'll be the devil then.
You like that?
I don't like or dislike nothing. I see everything as it is. Your courtrooms have convicted me for being Jesus Christ in one courtroom. Well, and then in the other courtroom, you convicted me for being the devil. Now, if you believe in your own courtrooms, you convicted me for being the father of this country. We'll say that I am all these things that you think I am.
Right.
Wouldn't that be more fearful than letting me try to be a nice guy? Would you want to make me into those things? Would you want me to? Do you need someone like that in your world? That's your judgment now. The judgment you're making on this mirror, man, you got to carry it. You want to make me a terrible, violent, no good, so-and-so, and who run? When actually, in reality, I'm a deadhead, man. I've been dead since 1951.
Jeffrey Dahmer, known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, was a serial killer who took the lives of 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Over the course of more than 13 years, Dahmer sought out his victims, mostly African American men, at gay bars, malls, and the bus stop. He lured them to his home with promise of money and sex, and gave them alcohol that was laced with drugs before strangling them to death. He would then arrange in sexual acts with the corpses before dismembering them and disposing of some of the body parts while keeping others as a souvenir. He frequently took photos of his victims at various stages of the murder so that he could recall each act afterwards and receive more gratification. Dahmer was captured in 1991 and sentenced to 16 life terms. Before Dahmer was killed in 1994 by a fellow inmate, he agreed to the following interview.
I had these obsessive desires and thoughts wanting to control them, to, I don't know how to put it, possess them permanently.
And that's why you killed them.
Right, right. Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as the skull and skeleton.
Jeffrey Dahmer is recalling his monstrous past. Almost 2 years ago, in this little apartment in Milwaukee, police discovered the grisly remnants of one of the most horrible crime sprees in American history. Jeffrey Dahmer, an unassuming chocolate factory worker, would eventually confess that he had seduced, murdered, and dismembered 17 young men. He even ate some of his victims' body parts. He instantly became the center of worldwide media attention, a serial killer unmasked. There were protests and press conferences in Milwaukee as people tried to understand how this could have happened in their midst. How did Jeffrey Dahmer get away with murder after murder for 13 years? How did a boy born into a hardworking middle-class family turn into the worst kind of monster imaginable? In this exclusive interview, we put those questions to Jeffrey Dahmer himself. We met with him at the maximum security prison where he is serving his sentence of 999 years. For the first time, he talks about his crimes and gives us a chilling look inside the mind of a serial killer.
It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. When you depersonalize another person and view them as just an object for pleasure instead of a living, breathing human being, it seems to make it easier to do things you shouldn't do.
The reason why Jeffrey Dahmer was able to get away with his crimes was because of just what you are seeing here. Jeffrey Dahmer is intelligent and articulate. That is what makes him so frightening. But if you listen carefully to his words throughout this interview, you realize it is a thin disguise. You do sound, though, like the kind of person who could have said to himself, "This is wrong. I must stop."
I always knew that it was wrong, but after the first killing was not planned. I was coming back from the shopping mall back in '78. I'd had fantasies about picking up a hitchhiker and taking him back to the house and having complete control and dominance over him.
The hitchhiker's name was Stephen Hicks. He was just 18. Jeffrey Dahmer took him to his parents' house. There, he strangled him with a barbell. He dismembered the body and hid it in a drain pipe. It was Jeffrey Dahmer who gave those details to the police in his confession.
No one
no one had a clue as to what was happening for over a decade.
During that time, Jeffrey Dahmer joined the army and was sent to Germany. He was eventually discharged for a drinking problem and returned to Ohio. 9 years after Stephen Hicks' murder, the killing began again. What happened to you in the 9 years in between that you were able to stop, that you were able to control yourself?
This wasn't an opportunity to fully express what I wanted to do. There was just not the physical opportunity to do it then. And I started, when I moved to Milwaukee in '81, I started reading pornography, going to the bookstores. Eventually that led to frequenting the gay bars. And then one time I brought this young man back to the hotel room, the Ambassador Hotel. Was just planning on drugging him and spending the night with him. I had no intention of hurting him. When I woke up in the morning, he had a broken rib here, was heavily bruised. Apparently I had beaten him to death with my fists.
And you have no memory?
I have no memory of it, but that's what started the whole spree all over again.
Dahmer says he snuck the corpse of his victim, Stephen Toomey, out of his hotel room in a suitcase. Then he took it to his grandmother's house, where he cut up the body and put it in plastic garbage bags. When you killed these men, afterwards, were you repulsed? Were you upset?
No, at the time, it was almost addictive. It was almost a surge of energy. I wouldn't have to worry about any of their needs or anything. I just had complete control of the situation.
But Jeffrey Dahmer was out of control. The urge to kill had overpowered him. As police later learned, he wasn't satisfied with his victim's death. He wanted more. Why did you photograph them?
It was my way of remembering their appearance, their physical beauty. I also wanted to keep if I couldn't keep them there with me whole, at least I felt that I could keep their skeletons. And I even went so far as planning on setting up an altar with the 10 different skulls and skeletons.
And what was the purpose of the altar going to be?
As a sort of memorial. A point where I could, I don't know, it's so bizarre and strange, it's hard to describe. A place where I could collect my thoughts and feed my obsession.
When the bodies were still in your apartment, there was no time when you would see them and say, this is grotesque. What have I done?
There were times, but the compulsive obsession with doing what I was doing overpowered any feelings of revulsion.
This man with a quiet, almost shy demeanor became a master manipulator who was able to lure strangers he met at gay bars to his apartment. He was even able to con the police into returning a 14-year-old boy to him after neighbors called 911 upset that the child was in the street naked and bleeding. Dahmer convinced the police that he and the boy were simply having a lover's quarrel.
It's the intoxicated boyfriend of another boyfriend.
Wow.
It wasn't a child, it was an adult.
After the police left, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered that boy, counteracted to some phone. This man says he had a near-fatal encounter with Jeffrey Dahmer.
He wanted to take off my back. He hit me with a rubber hammer on my neck.
He was lucky to escape because by then the killing had become almost routine. Before you went out to pick up the man, was there any kind of ritual you went through?
I go to the nightclubs to drink, watch the striptease shows. And if I didn't meet anyone at the bars, I'd go to the bath clubs
and meet someone there, offer them money, and we'd go back to the apartment, have a few drinks. I'd have the sleeping pill mixture already prepared. Person would drink it, fall asleep, and that's when they would be strangled.
Watching the movie Exorcist 3 was also part of his ritual. It put him in the mood for murder.
I felt so hopelessly evil and perverted that I actually derived a sort of pleasure from watching that tape.
Did you like feeling evil?
No, I didn't. But I tried to overcome the thoughts, and it worked for a while, but eventually I gave in.
While Jeffrey Dahmer may say things today that make it seem like he understands what went on in his mind, he does not. All he can do is tell you what happened, but he cannot stop whatever it is that drove him to kill in the first place. Do you still feel those same urges? Do you still feel that compulsion, that obsession?
I wish I could say that it just left completely, but no, there are times when I still do have the old compulsions.
Jeffrey Dahmer says as time went on, his mind became more and more warped, and yet he was clever enough to continue to elude police and lure young men to his apartment. We should warn you, the details are very graphic.
I started having these obsessive thoughts when I was about 15 and 16, and they got worse and worse.
What were your fantasies about?
They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality.
Was there pleasure in that fantasy?
There was excitement, fear, pleasure, all mixed together.
Jeffrey Dahmer fulfilled his fantasies by murdering and dismembering 17 young men. In time, his desires became more extreme, his deeds more grotesque. Listen to him talk about the most unnatural things in the most matter-of-fact of ways. That's when you realize that none of it has touched him.
I was branching out. That's when the cannibalism started, eating of the heart and the arm muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me. At first, it was just curiosity, and then it became compulsive. Then I tried to keep the person alive by inducing a zombie-like state. Injecting first dilute acid solution into their brain or hot water. And it never did completely work.
Could someone like you be stopped? Could you be helped?
No, I was dead set on going with this compulsion. It was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction.
He became so warped by his evil impulses that he even took a victim's head with him to work at the Ambrosia chocolate factory.
I kept the mummified head and skull of one of the victims in a carrying case in my locker at work.
Were you almost flaunting it?
Yes, but that's how strong the compulsion was. That's how bizarre the desire was. I wanted to keep something of the person with me.
Jeffrey Dahmer exhibited some disturbing behavior early on. He began drinking heavily as a teenager, dropped out of college, was arrested for indecent exposure, disorderly conduct, and fondling a 13-year-old boy. Tragically, one of his murder victims would be that boy's brother. You know what started it? Is there any kind of incident that you can remember?
To this day, I don't know what started it. And the person to blame is sitting right across from you. That's the only person. Not parents, not society, not pornography. I mean, those are just excuses.
His macabre 13-year crime spree finally ended when this man, Tracy Edwards, brought the police to the infamous apartment. Like the others, he had gone there with the promise of money.
He was listening to my heart. At a point, he told me he was gonna eat my heart at that point. I hit him, and I ran.
What was the turning point for you that made you suddenly realize that you had done something terribly wrong, something you should be sorry for?
It was the night of the arrest. I have no memory of what happened during the 6 hours before the last victim ran out of the apartment. I heard a knock on the door, and the police were there with the last victim. They asked me where the key was to the handcuffs. My mind was in a haze. I sort of pointed to the bedroom, and that's where they found the pictures. And they yelled, "Cuff him!" And I was handcuffed. And it was just the realization that there was no point in trying to hide my actions anymore. The best route was to help the police identify all the victims and just make a complete confession.
When it was revealed that most of the victims were Black or homosexual, people in Milwaukee were incensed. Many felt that was why he went after them and why the police didn't seem to care when their families reported them missing. 10 of your 17 victims were Black. Were they racially motivated?
It was not racially motivated. It was not sexual preference. It was just to find an obsession with the best looking young man I could find.
While you just heard him say that his sexual preference had nothing to do with the killings,
No.
he has not come to terms with his homosexuality.
Never understood it. There was no use trying to fight it because I couldn't rid myself of it. It was too powerful and persistent.
Do you dislike it?
Yes, it's caused a lot of problems for me. A lot of conflicts and unanswered questions.
The conflicts remain with him, and so do his compulsions. But in prison, he finally cannot act on his savage desires. If you were out on the street now, would you still be committing the crimes?
Probably. If this hadn't happened, there's no doubt I probably would be. I can't think of anything that would have stopped me.
I hope you enjoyed these firsthand accounts from these terrifying serial killers. So remember to stay safe and subscribe.